London, 1933. A night thick with fog curled around Ashbury House like a living shroud. Inside, a single lamp glowed from the study window, then suddenly flickered out. Moments later came the scream. When the servants burst into the locked room, they found the wealthy widow Rosamond Ashbury slumped over her escritoire, her pearl necklace snapped, glimmering like teardrops across the floor. There was no sign of forced entry. No weapon, no footprints, nothing but the faint scent of lavender drifting in the cold air. Chapter 1. The Widow's Last Evening. The fog had descended upon the western edges of London, with a thickness that made Ashbury House seem to float in a sea of ghostly vapour. It clung to the stone walls like damp fingers, and dulled the lamps lining the long gravel drive. Though it was not yet 8 in the evening, darkness had gathered heavily, pooling in corners and draping the gardens in shadow. Only the faint glow from the study window punctured the gloom, a lonely beacon burning steadily through the mist. Inside the manor, Rosamond Ashbury, wealthy widow, patron of several charities, owner of a considerable fortune, sat alone at her escritoire, quill hovering just above the creamy paper. Her hand trembled once, then steadied. The fire crackling behind her cast a faint golden halo around her figure, yet no warmth reached her expression. Lines of worry etched themselves across her usually composed features. A soft knock came at the doorway. "Madam," said Felicity Harrow, the housekeeper, her voice low and respectful, "your evening tea." Rosamond turned slightly, her eyes reflecting the amber light of the lamp. She offered a thin smile, too thin for Felicity's liking. "Set it down, if you please. And that will be all for tonight, Felicity." The housekeeper hesitated. She had served Rosamond for nearly 12 years, and had grown familiar with the widow's moods, her gracious hospitality, her occasional restlessness, and the rare moments of deep private melancholy that crept upon her unbidden. But tonight, something felt different. A heaviness hung in the air, an unspoken dread. "Madam, if you require anything, thank you, Felicity." Rosamond turned back to her desk. "I wish to be undisturbed." Dismissed, yet uneasy, Felicity closed the door softly behind her and walked down the dim corridor, glancing back once as if expecting to hear Rosamond call out. But no sound followed. A few moments later, the brass lamp on the desk flickered. Rosamond exhaled slowly, placing her quill onto its rest. She had been writing a letter, one she had begun and crumpled half a dozen times already. The present sheet contained only a few lines, the ink still glistening. She read it once more, her lips pressed tightly together. "I can no longer endure your demands. I will confront you at once and put an end to this." Her pulse quickened. She swallowed hard, folded the paper, and slipped it into a drawer. Then she reached for a small envelope that lay partly hidden beneath a book. Its corner was torn, as though ripped in haste. She didn't open it again. She didn't need to. She had memorized every word. "Your past returns. Pay, or your secret dies with you." A sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes, snapping her out of her thoughts. The fog pressed against the glass with an almost sentient persistence, as though listening. Rosamond stood and moved toward the fireplace, holding her hands near the heat though she did not shiver. The fire cast dancing shadows along the mahogany bookshelves. Somewhere in the distance, a carriage rolled along the main road, the clatter of wheels muffled by the oppressive night. Her late husband's portrait hung above the mantel, a dignified man, grey-haired, blue-eyed, stern yet proud. She gazed at it with an expression that mingled affection with regret. "I never wished for this, Robert," she whispered, "but the past has claws. It was foolish to think it would sleep forever. She turned back to her desk and contemplated the fresh sheet beside the inkpot. Tonight, she was to finish her new will, one that would dramatically alter the futures of the people who depended on her. It was a decision she had wrestled with, but one she felt compelled to make at last. Taking her quill again, she dipped it into ink, poised to continue, when something changed. A faint sound. Soft, indistinct but unmistakable, the crunch of gravel outside the window. Her head snapped up, the window was latched, the curtains stirred faintly with the draught of the room. She set the quill down and moved cautiously toward the glass, parting the velvet drapes just enough to peer into the night. Nothing. Only fog, swirling and opaque, reflecting the lamplight in shimmering halos. She let the curtain fall, pressing a hand to her chest. Perhaps the night was playing tricks on her. Or perhaps a second sound, this one unmistakable. A footstep. She spun around toward the door, but it remained closed. Her breath quickened. She took a step back until her shoulders brushed the edge of her escritoire. Who is there? Silence. Then, very softly, a knock. Except it did not sound like a hand upon wood. It was too faint, too strangely angled. It sounded as if it came from within the room. Rosamond stifled a gasp. "Enough," she whispered to herself. "I will not be bullied by phantoms." Summoning her resolve, she strode back to the desk, opened the drawer with the letter fragment, and took out a small key. It glinted in the lamplight, a narrow brass key belonging to the bottom drawer. Inside that drawer lay a second envelope, larger, sealed with a smear of reddish wax. She hesitated before reaching for it, as though the very object radiated danger. Then she drew it out. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, folded neatly. She unfolded it and read, her face drained of colour. No, this cannot be. She dropped the page. It fluttered to the carpet like a wounded bird. At once, she hurried to the door and locked it with a sharp twist of the key. Her fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled as she tried to tie a length of string, thin but sturdy, around the key. Her hands shook violently. "If you return," she whispered, "I will be ready this time." A sound rose from the corridor. A soft, almost polite knock this time. "Madam?" Felicity's voice. "Are you well?" Rosamond hesitated, her breathing uneven. "Yes," she called back, voice trembling. I am quite well." But she knew it was a lie, and Felicity must have sensed it, for she lingered outside the door a moment longer before retreating again. Rosamond turned in a frantic circle, pacing the perimeter of the room. The fire flickered, the lamp pulsed, shadows seemed to stretch. Her mind raced. Should she send for Inspector Sharp? Should she confide in the housekeeper? Should she simply flee? No, she could not. The blackmailer had threatened too much. Too many lives, too many secrets that would drag innocent people into ruin if exposed. She would face him, whoever he was, face him here, in her own study. She bent to pick up the parchment she had dropped, and froze. There was someone outside the window. A blurred outline, tall, unmoving, pressed against the fog. Rosamond stumbled backward, knocking her chair aside. A heartbeat later, the lamp flickered violently, throwing the room into alternating bands of light and shadow, and then darkness. The lamp extinguished. The fire guttered low. The window latch rattled violently, as though a hand clawed at it from outside. Rosamond's scream tore through the house. Minutes later, running footsteps thundered down the hall. Doors flung open. The housekeeper arrived first, breathless and pale. then the butler, then Clara, then Lionel, faces all bearing fear, confusion, alarm. They reached the study door. "Mrs. Ashbury," Felicity cried. "Madam, are you in distress? Please answer." But there was nothing. No answer, no movement, and the door was locked. Lionel threw his shoulder into it. Clara cried out in panic, and finally, the old lock gave way. The door burst open. The room was dim, lit only by the dying embers in the hearth. And there, slumped over the escritoire, her head resting at an unnatural angle, was Rosamond Ashbury. Her pearl necklace had snapped, scattering beads across the floor like fallen stars. Felicity gasped. Clara shrieked. Lionel cursed under his breath. There was no sign of forced entry, no intruder, no open window, nothing disturbed but the widow's still form, and the broken string still dangling from the key in the lock. The scent of lavender drifted in the air. Lionel whispered, "What happened here?" No one answered, because at that exact moment, Hercule Poirot was already on his way to Ashbury House, summoned by an urgent telegram that had arrived not an hour earlier. And he would find, in that lonely study filled with fog and secrets, a puzzle perfectly suited to the little dowager grey cells. Chapter 2. 4 Figures in the Shadows. The morning broke pale and anemic over Ashbury House, the fog thinning into wisps that clung stubbornly to the hedgerows. By the time Hercule Poirot arrived, the household had retreated into a state of stunned quietude, each inhabitant moving as though afraid to disturb the air that had witnessed tragedy. Poirot stepped through the front door with deliberate grace, his polished shoes tapping lightly against the hall's marble floor. His moustache was immaculately shaped, his grey-gloved hands folded neatly behind his back. A sombre Inspector Sharp greeted him. "Thank you for coming so swiftly, Monsieur Poirot," Sharp said. "It's a situation beyond ordinary explanation." Poirot cast a keen eye at the high ceilings, the intricate mouldings, and the faint scuffs on the floor near the study door. Nothing escaped his notice. "When the circumstances are extraordinary," Poirot said gently, "it is then that the truth reveals itself by the smallest details. Now take me to the family, those who awaited Madame Ashbury's will." They moved to the morning room, where a dreary light filtered through lace curtains. 4 figures waited inside, each one shaped by grief, or the performance of it. Poirot's gaze swept the room, studying them not as suspects, but as a portrait of human complexity. Lionel Greaves stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back. A tall man with greying temples and a face lined from years of estate work, he wore a neatly pressed suit, but had the posture of someone carrying invisible burdens. "Mr. Greaves," Sharp said, "you were the last staff member to see Mrs. Ashbury last night." Lionel nodded solemnly. "She retired to her study a little after 7. I saw to the accounts in the library until 8:30, then went to bed." Poirot stepped closer. "And you heard nothing? No cry? No disturbance?" Lionel shook his head. "Not a sound, though the fog was thick. It muffles things." Poirot observed Lionel's shoes, well polished, but the faintest smear of soil edged the heel. "Tell me," Poirot continued, "Madame Ashbury trusted you?" Lionel hesitated. "Of course. I have managed her affairs since before her husband died." A faint flush rose to his cheeks. Poirot noted the reaction but said nothing for now. Clara Montjoy sat rigidly in an armchair, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. She was a striking young woman, dark hair pinned neatly, lips painted deep plum, eyes sharp with emotion she tried to conceal. "Aunt Rosamond was unpredictable at times," she said when introduced, "but I loved her, I truly did." "Yet you quarrelled recently?" Poirot asked softly. Clara's eyes flickered. We disagreed on some matters, family matters, nothing more. Poirot tilted his head. And you visited her yesterday afternoon? Yes, she admitted. We spoke briefly. I left before dinner. She met his gaze with forced calm. I was at a friend's flat on Chiswick High Road afterward. She can vouch for me. Poirot noticed the way her foot tapped beneath her skirt, a nervous habit poorly concealed. Grief, guilt, fear? The little grey cells stored the observation. Edmund Sykes lounged with calculated nonchalance on a chaise near the fireplace. Handsome in a slightly careless way, his tie was loosely knotted, his blonde hair tousled as though he had run his hands through it repeatedly. "Monsieur Poirot," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Tragic business, absolutely tragic. Rosamond was a dear friend." Poirot lifted a brow. "Friend is a generous term. What exactly was your role here, Monsieur Sykes?" Edmund shrugged. "Companion, social escort, occasional secretary. Mrs. Ashbury found my company pleasant." The implication hung in the air like perfume. Poirot stepped closer. A faint scent drifted from Edmund's coat. Lavender, subtle but unmistakable. Poirot pretended not to notice. "And last night, where were you?" "In the garden," Edmund replied easily. "I enjoy evening air, though I admit visibility was dreadful." Poirot's eyes dropped to his shoes, perfectly clean. "Strange," he murmured. "Most gardens in London are not paved." Edmund's smile faltered. "Perhaps," Poirot added lightly, "you floated." Felicity stood near the doorway, hands wringing a handkerchief nearly to shreds. She had been with Rosamond longer than any of them. Her loyalty was unquestionable, but loyalty, Poirot knew, often hid complicated truths. "Mrs. Harrow," Poirot said gently, "you seem deeply affected." Her voice trembled. "Mrs. Ashbury was like family to me." Poirot nodded. "Last night, did you sense she was troubled?" Felicity swallowed. I did. She dismissed the staff early, and when I brought her tea, her hand shook when she took the tray." "You did not stay?" "She insisted she wished to work undisturbed." Poirot stepped closer. "Did she mention receiving correspondence? A letter, perhaps?" Felicity froze, just for a fraction of a second. But Poirot caught it. "I don't know," she whispered. Her lie was gentle, almost tender, but a lie nonetheless. When Inspector Sharp stepped forward to continue the interview, Poirot raised one elegant hand. "If you permit, mon ami, I will lead." Sharp hesitated, then nodded. Poirot turned to all four, his voice calm but edged with precision. "Madame Ashbury died in a locked room, with no weapon, no intruder, and no sign of struggle, yet with terror etched upon her face." Silence. He paced slowly, hands behind his back. In her hand she clutched a torn fragment of paper. On it was written only one word, black. Clara inhaled sharply. Edmund looked away. Lionel stiffened. Felicity's handkerchief slipped from her hand. Poirot continued. "You each had reason to fear Madame Ashbury's knowledge, her wealth or her influence, and one among you," he paused, "stood to lose the most if she completed her new will, which I found on her desk." Every head snapped up. "A new will," Clara whispered. "Indeed, mademoiselle, one that changes everything." Clara's complexion paled. Lionel's jaw clenched. Edmund shifted anxiously. Felicity closed her eyes. Poirot watched them all. "Now," he said, his tone sharpening like the click of a lock sliding into place, "I will speak with each of you again, alone, and I warn you, a lie, no matter how small, will betray you to Hercule Poirot." He turned to the inspector. "Please arrange for the household to remain on the premises. I believe, Inspector, that before this day is out—" He smiled grimly. The fog surrounding this case will begin to lift. Chapter 3. The Altered Will. Hercule Poirot approached the late Rosamond Ashbury's study with a precision that made Inspector Sharp slow his pace to avoid overtaking him. The door, splintered at the lock from the forced entry, hung slightly ajar. Poirot paused to examine the jagged wood, brushing his gloved fingertips across its rough edges. "One sees immediately," he murmured, "that the lock was sturdy. Admirably so. It resisted until the final blow." He stepped inside. "But that, mon ami, is not what interests me." The study was a tableau of stillness. Dust motes floated in the grey morning light, drifting like lost spirits above Rosamond's empty chair. The fire had long gone out, leaving only brittle black logs and a faint scent of char. A single pearl, escaped from her broken necklace, glimmered near the hearth. Poirot knelt to inspect it. "A symbol," he whispered. "Something delicate, snapped violently. It is poetic, yes, but also practical. It tells us of sudden fear, or sudden force." Inspector Sharp crossed his arms. "The medical examiner believes she suffered cardiac shock. No external injuries." Poirot nodded. "Yet the room speaks of tension, and the desk— Ah!" He moved swiftly toward the escritoire. The surface was orderly, almost unnaturally so, as though Rosamond had intended to leave nothing to chance. On the top right lay an uncapped inkpot, a gold pen, and a sheet of parchment weighed down by a small brass paperweight shaped like an owl. Poirot lifted the paperweight, revealing a fresh document, its ink barely dry. Inspector Sharp leaned closer. "Is that—" "Yes, mon ami," Poirot said softly. "A new will." He read the first lines. Eyes narrowing. "This draft differs greatly from her existing testament. The niece, Mademoiselle Clara, receives only a modest allowance, far less than expected." He flipped the page. "The estate manager, Monsieur Lionel Greaves, receives a stipend, but no share of assets. And Monsieur Edmund Sykes," he broke off. "Removed entirely," Sharp finished grimly. Poirot tapped the page with a slender forefinger. "This, my friend, is dynamite. Whoever knew of her intentions last night had reason, powerful reason, to prevent its signing." Sharp sighed. But was anyone aware of it? Poirot tutted gently. "Inspector, in every household, secrets travel faster than telegrams." He placed the will aside and pulled open the right-hand drawer. Orderly stacks of letters lined its interior. Charity correspondence, household accounts, invitations to upcoming galas. Nothing unusual. He opened the left drawer, empty. Poirot frowned. "Empty? Entirely?" Sharp nodded. "We found it like that." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "But she was writing letters last night. One was incomplete, and there is— Ah!" He spotted it then. A small scrap of paper caught beneath the left drawer's metal track. Using tweezers, he coaxed it free. Only half a word adorned it. Blackmail, Sharp muttered. "Seems obvious enough." "Non," Poirot corrected gently. "Obvious, yes. But the obvious is rarely the truth. A torn letter suggests haste or struggle. Yet her body shows no signs of fight." Poirot pressed the scrap to his nose, inhaling cautiously. "A faint perfume, lavender." Sharp blinked. "Housekeeper wears lavender." Poirot smiled knowingly. "But so does Monsieur Sykes, and the niece's gloves, and even the soaps provided in the guest washroom. Lavender is a scent democratic in its reach." He stood, dusting off his trousers. "Let us examine the final drawer, the locked one." Poirot produced the small brass key found dangling from the door lock when the body was discovered. He inserted it into the lower drawer and turned it gently. The mechanism clicked open. Poirot lifted the locket first. Inside was a miniature portrait of Rosamond as a young woman, barely 18, with soft curls and a hopeful smile. On the opposite side was a man's portrait. Inspector Sharp raised a brow. Her late husband? Poirot shook his head. No, this man has darker hair, a sharper jaw, someone else entirely. A lover? Poirot closed the locket. Or a ghost from the past? He moved to the stack of letters next. Their dates spanned more than a decade. The handwriting was elegant but unfamiliar. These were kept with care, Poirot observed. Private exchanges, perhaps, and the ribbon untouched recently. So, they are not connected to last night. He placed them carefully aside. Finally, he opened the ledger. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple account book. Charitable contributions, expenses, notes in Rosamond's neat script. But on the final pages, the entries changed tone. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Sharp asked. Poirot read aloud. "He has found me again. The letters are becoming more threatening. Fear what he knows. I fear what he will do." Sharp exhaled sharply. So she was being blackmailed. Poirot tapped the page, and she intended to end it. See this line, written the very afternoon she died. "Tonight I confront him. I have arranged the room." Sharp blinked. "Arranged the room? What does that mean?" "Patience, mon ami," Poirot said softly. "The room holds many secrets." He paced slowly, studying the walls, the carpet, the height of the window latch. Sharp noted his expression. "You've found something." Poirot gestured toward the window. "See here, a faint smear beneath the latch. Something oily." Sharp leaned close. "Lavender oil?" Poirot nodded. "Commonly used to loosen stiff mechanisms. Someone oiled this latch recently. But why? The window was locked from inside." He moved to the door next, and the string attached to the interior lock. "This is curious. It hangs at a length convenient to someone standing by the desk. A simple tug could lock the door from within." Sharp swallowed. So she planned to lock herself in. Why? "To protect herself," Poirot said softly, "or to trap her blackmailer." He stepped back toward the desk, gazing over its surface once more. "There is more here, much more. Madame Ashbury prepared her study like a stage, each object placed with intent, but one detail is missing." Sharp frowned. "What detail?" Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "The missing study key. The key that should have been in her possession, or in this drawer, is gone." Sharp stiffened. "Someone took it?" Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Someone who wished to give the illusion of a sealed room, while leaving none of the usual means of entry." He looked toward the doorway, where faint voices drifted from the hall, the suspects murmuring among themselves. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And now, Inspector," he said softly, "it is time to ask which among them feared the signing of the new will most, and which feared the truth of Madame Ashbury's past even more." Chapter 4. Suspicions in the drawing room. The drawing room of Ashbury Manor was usually a place of serenity. Walls lined with pastoral paintings, velvet drapes the colour of deep wine, and a piano whose polished wood gleamed even in dim light. But this morning it thrummed with unease. 3 suspects stood in separate corners like mismatched chess pieces, each wary of the others, each bracing for Hercule Poirot's questions. Poirot entered with Inspector Sharp at his side, his step light, his gaze sharp. "Mes amis," Poirot began, hands clasped behind his back. "We proceed now to the interviews, we? But more than interviews, they are conversations, a chance for truth to breathe." His eyes landed first on Clara Ashbury, the niece. She stood by the fireplace, twisting a lace handkerchief until the embroidery nearly tore. Her blue eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness. "Miss Ashbury," Poirot said gently, "you were close to your aunt?" She nodded. "Very. I loved her dearly." Poirot tilted his head. And yet she intended to reduce your inheritance. Clara's breath hitched. I didn't know that. I swear I didn't. But you expected to receive the house? Clara swallowed. She always hinted that one day it would be mine. Poirot paced slowly. And last night, you visited her. Yes, around 9. She was distracted, pale. I asked if she was feeling well, but she brushed me off. She wanted to write letters, she said. You did not see what she wrote? No. Poirot stepped closer. Mademoiselle, your gloves, they smell faintly of lavender. Clara blinked. Yes. I use lavender oil on the leather to keep it from cracking. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Merci. He motioned toward the sofa. Sit, if you please. Clara sank down as though her legs could no longer support her. Poirot turned next to Edmund Sykes, the adviser. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a jaw as sharp as the crease in his trousers. His expression was polished neutrality, but his fingers tapped ceaselessly against his thigh. Monsieur Sykes, Poirot greeted. Your relationship with Madame Ashbury was professional, yes? Edmund's lips tightened. Primarily financial. I managed her investments and legal affairs. And she trusted you? He hesitated. Yes, until recently. Ah. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Something changed? Edmund exhaled. She had become suspicious of everyone. Me, the staff, even her own family. She hinted at threats but refused to elaborate. Poirot studied him. And last night, did you see her? Around 9:30. She summoned me to discuss revisions to her will. She was anxious, unusually so. Poirot gave a small nod. She intended to remove you entirely from the document. Edmund's composure cracked slightly. I did not know, but if she wished it, that was her right. I had no expectation beyond my salary. Poirot's voice softened. Your gloves, in your coat pocket, they too smell of lavender. Edmund gave a small, tight smile. A personal cologne. I've used it for years. Poirot pressed no further. Merci, monsieur. Finally, his attention turned to Lionel Greaves, the estate manager. Lionel stood near the window, posture rigid, jaw clenched. His hands, large and roughened by work, twisted the brim of his hat. Mr. Greaves, Poirot said politely, you were responsible for the day-to-day running of the house? Yes, sir. His voice was deep, gravelly. Mrs. Ashbury relied on me for everything from repairs to scheduling staff. You saw her often? Every day. Poirot nodded. And last night? Lionel shifted. I checked on her around 8. She seemed nervous, jumping at sounds. I offered to stay close, but she dismissed me. Poirot approached him slowly. Tell me, monsieur, did you know she planned to change her will? Lionel's jaw tightened. I heard rumours. Staff gossip. I didn't ask. In this new version, Poirot said, watching his expression carefully, you were to receive less than before. A flicker of bitterness crossed Lionel's eyes. I wasn't in it for the money. I served her family for 20 years. Poirot inhaled softly. Your hands, they smell faintly of lavender. Why is this? Lionel blinked in confusion. Lavender? He looked at his palms as though seeing them for the first time. Ah, yes. I polished the brass doorknobs in the west wing yesterday. The cleaning oil is lavender-based. Poirot nodded once more. Très bien. Inspector Sharp stepped forward. All 3 of them smell of lavender. That doesn't help us at all. On the contrary, Poirot said with a small smile. When everyone shares a trait, its value lies not in its presence, but in its subtleties. Sharp groaned softly. You're going to make me guess, aren't you? Poirot ignored him and turned to the suspects once more. There is a matter I wish to clarify. he said. "Each of you claims to have seen Madame Ashbury last night. Each describes her as anxious, disturbed, yet none of you truly understand the reason." He paused dramatically. "She was being blackmailed." Clara gasped. Edmund stiffened. Lionel's hat fell from his hands. Poirot let the silence stretch. "Yes," he continued, "she left explicit notes in her ledger. She also wrote a letter naming her tormentor, but that letter is missing." Clara looked horrified. "Are you saying one of us destroyed it?" Poirot raised a finger. "I am saying only that it is gone, and that one of you had reason to fear its contents." He paced before them like a lecturer in a grand hall. "The torn scrap of paper I found contained the beginning of a word, black. The rest was removed. The drawer where she kept her private correspondence was emptied." Edmund swallowed hard. "You believe the blackmailer murdered her?" Poirot smiled gently. "Ah, monsieur, I believe something much more interesting." He turned to the three. Madame Ashbury arranged her study. She set the stage. She locked the door with a string contraption. She prepared herself for a confrontation. Clara whispered, "She knew the blackmailer was coming." "Indeed," Poirot said softly, "and yet there was no sign of struggle, no forced entry, only fear and death." Lionel stepped forward, voice shaking. "But if she locked the door herself, then—" Poirot finished the sentence. "How did her visitor enter?" The room fell silent. Poirot's eyes swept across them, his voice low and precise. "There is an answer, a simple one, but it requires considering a fact none of you have yet acknowledged." He leaned in. "The blackmailer did not enter the study last night." He paused, "because they were already inside the house, with a key." He let the weight of that sink in. "And that key," he continued, "is now missing." Clara trembled. Edmund paled. Lionel clenched his fists. Poirot gave a small, enigmatic smile. "I know what must be done next. But first, Inspector, we shall examine the key ring of the household, and we shall compare it to the mechanism in the study door." His voice hardened. "For one of these keys is a forgery." Chapter 5. The key that should not exist. Poirot spent the remainder of the morning studying the household's master keyring with a meticulousness that left Inspector Sharp muttering about Belgians and their obsession with shiny objects. Though even he eventually fell silent as Poirot's eyes narrowed with growing intensity. The keys lay arranged upon a long mahogany table in the library, glinting in the pale winter light that pressed through the tall windows. Clara Ashbury, Edmund Sykes, and Lionel Greaves stood behind the detective in a tense semicircle, each pretending disinterest, yet unable to look away. Poirot lifted one key between thumb and forefinger. "This one, mes amis, is curious." The key was nearly identical to the others. Same cut, same bow, same worn grooves, yet Poirot's lips curled in mild triumph. "A brilliant copy, but imperfect. Do you see here, Inspector? A faint burr along the inner ridge. A sign of recent filing, homemade." Sharp leaned in, squinting. "Could be a servant, anyone with access to the workshop." Poirot shook his head. "No, a servant would not attempt such a forgery. They have no reason to. A key is made only when one must enter a place they are forbidden." His gaze swept toward the suspects. Clara's face whitened. Edmund's mouth twitched. Lionel's fists tightened. Poirot set the key down with ceremonial care before turning to the group. "The forgery corresponds exactly to the lock of Madame Ashbury's study. Someone created it to enter unseen, or to ensure access, should Madame Ashbury attempt to deny it." Clara burst out, "But why? She was frightened. Why would anyone need a secret key to the study unless they meant to confront her?" "Precisely," Poirot murmured. "And the confrontation, mademoiselle, came sooner than expected. He paced to the fireplace, speaking now in a tone that threaded calm with quiet menace. Last night, Madame Ashbury prepared herself for a meeting. She expected her blackmailer to arrive. She feared exposure, disgrace, ruin, something terrible that none of you have yet confessed to knowing. Edmund Sykes raised his chin stiffly. If she was being blackmailed, perhaps the reason was harmless, a misunderstanding. Poirot gave him a pitying look. One does not write letters begging for mercy over a misunderstanding, monsieur. Edmund flushed, but said nothing. Poirot continued. But here is the detail that puzzles me, a detail that reveals both her desperation and her cunning. She locked the door from the inside. She sealed herself in, thinking it would protect her. But she did not know that someone within this very house, already possessed a key she did not expect. Lionel stepped forward, his breath shaky. Are you saying someone used that key to enter the study while she was alive? Poirot gave a slow, almost sorrowful nod. Yes, and I believe Madame Ashbury recognized the intruder. There is no sign of struggle, because she trusted them, until something startled her. Something fatal. Clara covered her mouth. What could have startled her? Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and looked at each of them in turn. A scent, mademoiselle. A scent of lavender. The three suspects stiffened. Sharp frowned. You think she smelled the same lavender we found on all of them? Poirot sighed. Not the same lavender. 3 different varieties, 3 different sources, 3 different stories explaining the scent. And yet one does not frighten a woman into collapse merely by bearing a fragrance she already knew. No. He turned back to the table of keys. The clue is not in the smell itself, but in the meaning it carried for her. Something she feared, something connected to her past, something only the blackmailer knew. He picked up the forged key again, weighing it in his palm. This key is the heart of the matter. It proves premeditation. It proves trespass. It proves that someone intended to access Madame Ashbury's secrets long before last night. Poirot placed the key down gently, then turned to Lionel. Monsieur Greaves, you oversee the estate. Do you have knowledge of any unused rooms, locked storage, private safes? Lionel hesitated, then nodded. There's a storage attic above the west wing. Old trunks, personal letters, documents from her late husband. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, the past. Always it hides where no one wishes us to look. Clara whispered, but my aunt never went up there. Poirot replied quietly, because she feared what she had left behind. Without waiting for further protest, the detective swept from the room, Sharp and the suspects trailing him like uneasy shadows. They climbed the narrow servants' staircase, dust motes swirling in the cold air, until Lionel unlocked the small attic door. The room smelled of age. Old wood, forgotten linens, the faint sting of metal left too long untouched. Poirot walked slowly, reverently, as though stepping through a mausoleum. He knelt beside an elderly trunk bearing the initials A.A., Agatha Ashbury. Here, he whispered. Lionel helped him unfasten the corroded clasps. The lid groaned, revealing bundles of letters tied with ribbon, stacks of estate documents, and a single velvet pouch. Poirot opened it. A gold signet ring fell into his hand. Clara gasped. That belonged to Uncle Theodore. She lost it years ago. Poirot held the ring to the light. Madame Ashbury lied about losing it. She kept it hidden. Why? Because it was proof of something she wished to forget. Edmund stepped closer. Proof of what? Poirot looked up slowly. His eyes were sharp with revelation. This ring bears a crest, the crest of the Ashbury lineage, but inside he twisted the ring open, revealing a tiny concealed compartment. A compartment that contains, he murmured, a name. He held up the slip of paper within. 4 letters written in faded ink. Sharp's voice cracked. "What name?" Poirot unfolded the paper fully, and his voice filled the attic with solemn gravity. "The name," he said, "of the person who stood to lose everything if Madame Ashbury revealed her secret." He turned, eyes burning into those gathered. "Mes amis, the blackmailer is among us." He held the paper toward the light. "And now, I know who." Chapter 6. The Broken Alibi. The drawing-room felt smaller than ever as Poirot returned from the attic. The folded slip of paper tucked securely in his pocket, its weight much heavier than its size. Inspector Sharp hovered at his side with the tension of a man who had glimpsed the truth, but could not yet grasp its shape. Edmund Sykes stood ramrod straight near the piano, his jaw clenched with brittle dignity. Clara sat on a chaise longue, pale and trembling. Lionel Greaves positioned himself by the windowsill, his large hands balled tightly. The afternoon light broke in slanted beams across the room, dust swirling through the rays like slow-moving constellations. Poirot stopped in the very centre of the carpet, surveying the 3 suspects with a quiet composure that was far more unsettling than anger. "Mes amis," he began softly, "we are nearing the end of our little journey. But before we reach it, we must examine the matter of time. The alibis, as you English call them." Sharp scowled. "They all said the same thing. They each visited her at different times before she died. Nothing seems out of order." Poirot wagged a finger. "Ah, non, mon ami, not at all, because one alibi is broken." The room tensed collectively. Poirot turned to the mantel clock, ticking with a steady, indifferent rhythm. "We know," he said, "that Madame Ashbury was last seen alive at approximately 9:30. She was found dead at 10:30. Only 1 hour, 60 minutes in which her visitor arrived, confronted her, and startled her into cardiac collapse." He paused. "And it is in this narrow hour that the truth reveals itself." Edmund smoothed his waistcoat, the gesture intended to convey control. "I told you, I saw her just after 9:30. We discussed the will. She was anxious but unharmed. I left her alive." Poirot nodded. "Indeed, monsieur, you gave a very clear account." His eyes slid to Clara. "And you, mademoiselle, visited earlier at 9. You claim to have seen her writing letters." Clara nodded shakily. "Yes, she barely looked at me." Poirot turned to Lionel. "And you, Monsieur Greaves, saw her last at 8. Lionel exhaled heavily. "Correct." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, rocking forward slightly on his heels. "But," he said gently, "there is a problem." His gaze settled on Edmund. "Your time, Monsieur Sykes, is incorrect." Edmund stiffened. "What nonsense! It was 9:30. I checked my pocket watch." Poirot's brows arched. "Your pocket watch that Inspector Sharp examined this morning, oui? The pocket watch that was, how do you say, running 6 minutes fast." Edmund's composure faltered. I didn't realize. Of course not," Poirot said smoothly. "But if your watch was 6 minutes fast, you must adjust your claim accordingly. When you believed it was 9:30, in truth it was only 24 minutes past the hour, meaning you left Madame Ashbury at approximately 9:24. Clara inhaled sharply. Lionel's fists loosened. Sharp blinked. "That leaves," Poirot continued, "a full hour and 6 minutes before the body was discovered." Edmund's voice cracked for the first time. That proves nothing. Anyone could have gone in after me." "Ah," Poirot murmured, "but you see, monsieur, this also contradicts another detail." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You told me Madame Ashbury intended to return to her writing after your conversation. And yet, when we found her, there were no letters in progress, only a torn paper with the word black. That fragment must have been written long after Clara's visit. Therefore, she resumed writing after 9 o'clock." Poirot paced. But if she resumed writing, why did she stop abruptly? Why is the word incomplete? Why is the drawer empty? Why did she pull the string that prepared the door mechanism for a locked room scenario? His voice sharpened. She was interrupted. Poirot whirled to face Edmund Sykes fully. Interrupted by someone she feared. Edmund swallowed, eyes darting to the door as though calculating escape, but he composed himself. "I had no reason to harm her. My livelihood depended on her trust." Poirot smiled faintly. "You are intelligent, monsieur, but in moments of fear, even the most intelligent make mistakes." He motioned toward Inspector Sharp. "May we retrieve the forged key?" Sharp produced it from a small evidence pouch. Poirot held it up like a relic. "This key," he said, "was used recently. There are tiny scuffs on its teeth consistent with use in an older lock. It fits the study door, but more importantly," he leaned closer, "it bears traces of gold dust." Lionel blinked. "Gold. Yes," Poirot said. "Minute particles from Madame Ashbury's desk drawer, which has gold-gilded edges worn thin with age. Someone opened that drawer with the forged key. Someone removed her letters. Someone destroyed the evidence of blackmail." He spun suddenly, pointing at Edmund like a conductor concluding a symphony. "You, Monsieur Sykes, possess the means, the legal knowledge to forge signatures, the financial motive, the expertise to hide your trail, and the opportunity to tamper with the study drawer after she dismissed you." Edmund's voice rose. "What motive? If she removed me from her will, that hardly benefits me." Poirot's expression softened, almost sad. "No, monsieur. Not the will, the letters in the drawer." His hand dipped into his pocket. "The slip of paper hidden in the ring. The one who threatened her. The one who demanded money. The one who held her past hostage." He withdrew the folded paper. "And the name inscribed within?" Clara gasped. Lionel leaned forward. Sharp stiffened. Poirot unfolded it slowly, gracefully. Then he spoke. "The blackmailer was her adviser." Clara cried out. Lionel muttered something under his breath. Sharp swore sharply. Edmund staggered back as though struck. "That's absurd," he choked. "She relied on me. Why would I—" Poirot cut him off with a raised hand. "You blackmailed her because you discovered the truth about Madame Ashbury's late husband, his debts, his indiscretions, and the scandals she kept hidden for decades. You threatened to expose it unless she paid you. She paid at first, oui. But last night she resolved to end your extortion. She wrote your name, intending to send the evidence to her lawyer. But you arrived unexpectedly. She recognized your lavender cologne." His voice dropped a register, and the shock killed her. The room fell silent. Poirot sighed deeply, but what she did not anticipate was that you would steal the letter afterward. Edmund's knees buckled, and he steadied himself on the piano. Poirot stepped closer. "You did not kill her by your hand, monsieur, but you killed her by fear, and the law will not see a difference." Inspector Sharp moved toward him, cuffs ready. Edmund closed his eyes. Poirot whispered, "La vérité, she always rises." Chapter 7. The Letter That Should Have Been There. Inspector Sharp escorted Edmund Sykes out of the drawing-room with the stiff, purposeful tread of a man who believed the case nearly solved. Lionel Greaves watched them leave with rigid posture, while Clara Ashbury sat frozen on the edge of the chaise, her hands trembling in her lap. But Poirot did not watch the arrest. He stood perfectly still, eyes narrowed at a point in the empty air, as though listening to a voice no one else could hear. When the sound of footsteps faded down the corridor, Poirot spoke quietly. "No," he murmured, "it is not finished." Clara lifted her head. "Not finished? But you said—" "I said," Poirot corrected gently, "that Monsieur Sikes was the blackmailer." "Yes, that is true, but the question remains, mademoiselle." He turned, his expression grave. "Why did Madame Ashbury prepare the room as though expecting violence?" Lionel frowned. "Because she feared him, clearly." Poirot shook his head slowly. "No, fear alone does not produce such careful staging. Locking mechanisms, torn paper fragments, drawers emptied. Fear is messy, fear is desperate, but that's study. It was prepared with intention." Clara's voice was thin. "You mean she expected someone else?" Poirot bowed his head. "Just so." Silence lapped against the walls of the drawing-room. "Madame Ashbury," Poirot continued, "was many things, proud, sharp of mind, meticulous in planning. She did not simply wait to be confronted. She orchestrated something, and what she orchestrated was interrupted." He moved toward the window, where faint winter light spilled across his shoes. Sharp re-entered, dusting his hands with satisfaction. "All right, Poirot, he's being taken into custody. The solicitor will need to sort through the letters you found. We can wrap this up." Poirot gave a courteous bow of his head. "Ah, mon ami, you English are always so eager to fold the case and go home for supper. But murder, no, forgive me, death is rarely so polite." Sharp frowned. "We have motive, means, opportunity, and inconsistencies," Poirot interrupted sharply. "Large ones, glaring ones, ones that shout at me." He tapped the mantelpiece with a rhythmic cadence. "First," he said, "Madame Ashbury tore a piece of paper bearing the beginning of the word black. But why begin a new letter when she had already hidden the incriminating one in her ring? Why write another at all?" Clara inhaled sharply. "She meant to warn someone," Poirot said softly. "Someone besides Sikes." Sharp opened his mouth, but Poirot raised a hand and strode toward the study door key hanging from the inspector's pocket. "The second inconsistency, the forged key." Poirot's eyes flashed. Sikes had it, yes, but Sikes could not have forged it. A legal adviser he is, oui, but a craftsman, a locksmith, no. He does not have the hands for such work. They are too smooth, too manicured. Sharp blinked. But then, who made it? Poirot's gaze slid toward Lionel. The estate manager froze. Poirot continued calmly. Only someone with access to the workshop, the tools, the materials, the privacy. Someone who had reason to create a key long before last night's events. Lionel's face reddened. "Hold on! I already told you. I polished the doorknobs. The lavender smell—" "Yes," Poirot said, "and I believed you. But polishing knobs does not explain why you carry 2 sets of keys in your coat." Lionel stiffened. Clara let out a small gasp. "2?" Poirot nodded gently. "Indeed. 1 set you presented to the inspector. The other you did not, because it was hidden in your pocket lining. And within that set," he extended his hand, "is a second copy of the study key." Sharp's eyes widened. But Poirot, he would have no reason. "Reason?" Poirot cut in softly. "He had reason aplenty. For Lionel Greaves has been with the Ashbury family for 20 years. He knows every corridor, every secret passage, every quarrel, every whisper of the household. And while Madame Ashbury grew suspicious of Sikes only recently—" Poirot leaned forward. She grew suspicious of you, Monsieur Greaves, long before. Lionel's knuckles whitened. This is absurd. Poirot did not raise his voice. Is it? Madame Ashbury dismissed half the staff last year. A restructuring, she called it, but she kept you until 2 weeks ago, when she told Clara she intended to replace the estate manager entirely. Clara's breath caught. She said she might, but I didn't know she had spoken to him. Poirot lifted a finger. She had not. Not yet. She feared his reaction. She feared the secrets he kept. She hesitated. He stepped closer to Lionel, whose shoulders stiffened like iron bars. You knew there was a blackmail situation, Poirot murmured, and you saw an opportunity. You forged a key to her private room. You searched her letters. You found evidence of Sykes's extortion, and then you realized something far more valuable. Poirot paused dramatically. That if Madame Ashbury believed Sykes was her tormentor, she would confront him, and you, monsieur, could rid the estate of 2 problems at once. Lionel swallowed, but his jaw was locked tight. You frightened her, Poirot said quietly. You entered the study before Sykes did, using the forged key. You startled her, just enough that she believed the threat was arriving early. She wrote the torn word black in a panic, then you left. And when Sykes arrived later, she was already trembling with terror. He never knew you had paved the way. Poirot turned to Sharp. Thus, Lionel Greaves engineered the circumstances of her collapse. He weaponized fear. Clara stared at Lionel with wide, horrified eyes. Is that true? Did you want her dead? Lionel's voice came out low, trembling with restrained fury. I gave my life to this house. She was going to throw me out, replace me like I was nothing after 20 years. Poirot bowed his head. So you exploited her fear of Sykes. You orchestrated a psychological trap. You did not need to strike her. You only needed to open the door. Sharp lunged to seize Lionel's arm, but Lionel stepped back sharply. You don't understand, Lionel shouted, voice echoing across the drawing room. Everything I did, everything, was to stay in the place I built. I knew she couldn't survive that kind of shock. Her heart was fragile. I only nudged events. Poirot spoke quietly, and nudged them into tragedy. Lionel sagged, the fight draining from him. Sharp took him by the arm, the weight of defeat heavy in every step. Clara looked between the 2 men, one led away earlier for blackmail, the other now for the orchestration of her aunt's death. Poirot exhaled slowly. A house of secrets, mademoiselle, he said gently. And secrets rarely die with their owners. Chapter 8. The ink that would not dry. The manor felt hollow after Lionel Greaves's arrest, as though the walls themselves were listening for new footsteps that would never come. The winter wind scraped at the window panes, whispering through the corridors like a restless spirit searching for an audience. Clara Ashbury stood near the study door, her eyes distant, her posture tense. She had aged years in a single day. Poirot approached her gently. You are troubled, mademoiselle. Clara startled, then offered a thin, brittle smile. How could I not be? First Edmund, then Lionel. Aunt Margaret's death seems to have pulled all the ugliness from beneath the floorboards. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. Yet ugliness does not appear from nowhere. It is coaxed, drawn out, provoked. A death, a secret, a blackmailer, a fearful heart. He paused. And now, something new. Clara blinked. New? Poirot motioned toward the study. Allow me to show you. Inside, the room remained as it had been. Papers scattered like pale leaves, the desk drawer half open, the heavy drapes stirring faintly with draughts. but Poirot gestured toward the writing table, where the torn page with the unfinished words still lay. Sharp joined them, rubbing his temples. "Poirot, I don't see what's left to uncover. We've got Sykes for blackmail and Greaves for the emotional coercion that caused her collapse. Isn't that enough?" Poirot's eyes glinted. "For the law, perhaps. For the truth? No." He picked up the torn paper. "Observe, Inspector, the ink." Sharp frowned. "I'm observing. It is darker at the edges than the centre," Poirot said. "Unevenly absorbed. And notice, the torn edge nearest the B is crisp, too crisp, as though the page were torn after the ink dried." Sharp's brow furrowed deeply. So, Poirot said softly, "Madame Ashbury wrote this note much earlier than we assumed, perhaps the night before. But the key detail," he raised the paper to the light, "is that the ink is not the same as that in the bottle on the writing desk." Clara inhaled sharply. "But that was her ink. She always used it." Poirot nodded. "Yes. And yet what she used for this note is different. Ever so slightly more blue, less black, another bottle entirely." Sharp crossed his arms. "Are you suggesting she wrote the note somewhere else?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I'm suggesting she wrote it under duress." The room fell silent. Poirot set down the paper, eyes sharp as knife points. "Consider, Lionel frightened her, yes. Edmund blackmailed her, yes. But neither forced her to write this message at this particular time. If the note was written earlier, but torn during the confrontation, then why was it placed so conveniently atop the desk during the event?" Clara pressed a hand to her chest. "You mean someone else moved it?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Moved it, positioned it, staged it." Sharp muttered, "But who would want to go to all that trouble after the fact?" "Not after," Poirot corrected. "Before, hours before Madame Ashbury collapsed." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "But why?" Poirot turned toward the fireplace, where a faint smudge of soot marked the stone, almost invisible unless one looked closely. "Because Madame Ashbury was preparing to reveal something," he said. "She intended to send a message, not to Sykes, not to Greaves, but to someone else entirely." Clara swallowed hard. "Who?" Poirot faced her, his expression unreadable. Someone she trusted, someone she believed would protect the estate after her death. Clara blinked. "But who would she confide in, aside from—" Then her breath caught. "Poirot," she whispered, "are you implying she meant to contact me?" The detective inclined his head. "Just so. She was trying to warn you." Sharp stared between them. "Warn her about what?" Poirot reached into his coat and withdrew a small folded sheet of paper, barely larger than a playing card. Clara gasped. "That! Aunt Margaret's ring!" "Yes," Poirot said. "This is the note hidden inside. But what is curious, mademoiselle, is that the message inside the ring is incomplete." He unfolded it carefully. 2 lines, neat handwriting, a message cut short. "Clara, if anything happens to me, look for the one with ink on their hands." Poirot let the words hang in the air. Sharp exhaled slowly. "Well, that's not helpful. Ink? Everyone writes." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Not the kind of ink that stains like this." He produced a small cloth, faintly smudged with a deep cerulean blue. "I obtained this from the corner of Madame's bedchamber earlier. Someone had dabbed their fingertips clean." He turned toward the bookshelf, specifically the narrow gap between 2 heavy volumes. Yet someone left behind a trail, faint, almost invisible, but there. Clara leaned forward. "Poirot, what is it?" Poirot slid one of the books out, a heavy tome of estate ledgers. The edges of the pages bore faint blue fingerprints. "These," Poirot said, "are fresh. hours old, and not from Madame Ashbury. Her hands showed no stains when she was found. Sharp looked utterly bewildered. So someone else used the ink. Someone else handled the books. Someone, Poirot said softly, who had every reason to ensure Madame Ashbury's death appeared as the product of fear and shock. Someone who waited, watched, and moved objects within the study to create a narrative. Clara's hands trembled. But who? Who could do such a thing? Poirot turned toward her with grave gentleness. Mademoiselle, someone who has already stood in this very room. Someone who has had access to your aunt's papers, her desk, her private correspondence. Poirot paused. Someone who has not yet been questioned. Sharp stiffened. But Poirot, everyone has been accounted for, except his eyes widened. Clara whispered the name at the same moment Poirot did. Beatrice, the housemaid, the quiet shadow, the one person who had been present during every moment leading up to the discovery, but had spoken little, observed much, and vanished conveniently during every crucial hour. Sharp swore. Where is she now? Poirot stepped to the doorway, his face stern with urgency. That, Inspector, is precisely the question. For if Madame Ashbury's final warning was meant to protect her niece, then Beatrice is not merely a witness. His eyes shone with cold certainty. She may well be the architect of everything. Chapter 9. The Quiet Footsteps of Beatrice Hale. The search for Beatrice Hale began in a flurry of urgency, but the manor itself seemed determined to hide her. Long corridors swallowed sound. Heavy drapes muffled the echo of footsteps. The chandeliers flickered as though shivering from unseen draughts. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, rattling them in their frames like fingers trying to claw their way in. Poirot moved quickly, faster than Sharp had ever seen him, though even in haste he maintained a strange, deliberate elegance. The detective paused at each door, tilting his head, studying the floorboards, the shadows, the faintest disturbances in the air. "Poirot!" Sharp called, slightly breathless. "The woman can't simply vanish." "Non, mon ami," Poirot murmured. "But she can retreat to the one place where no one would think to look. The realm of routine, the familiar, the hidden corners in which a servant becomes invisible." They turned down the west corridor. Clara hurried after them, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. "She wouldn't hurt anyone," Clara insisted. "Beatrice has served this household for years. She adored Aunt Margaret." Poirot stopped. He lifted a hand. "Adoration," he said softly, "can sour into resentment when affection is neither returned nor rewarded. And loyalty is a coin often spent by those who feel forgotten." Clara's mouth fell open. "You believe she killed Aunt Margaret? For what? Money?" Poirot did not answer at first. Instead, he knelt by a small scuff mark on the floor, almost imperceptible. A smear of blue ink clung to the wood. He dipped a finger, nodded. "She passed this way minutes ago." Sharp swore. "She's still in the manor." The chase resumed. They reached the servants' wing, a narrow passageway colder than the rest of the house, with cracked plaster and dim lighting. Poirot paused before a small wooden door. "Her room," Clara whispered. Poirot turned the handle. Inside was a modest, immaculate space. A narrow bed, a tiny writing desk, a trunk at the foot, and a wardrobe whose doors hung slightly open. Yet it was not the room's simplicity that caught his eye. It was the single sheet of paper resting neatly atop the desk. A letter. Sharp snatched it up, scanning rapidly. Good Lord, it's a resignation, dated for tomorrow." Poirot took it gently from the inspector. "Read the last line," he suggested. Sharp's voice wavered. Forgive me, for I cannot bear the weight of what I have done." Clara sank onto the bed, her eyes wide with disbelief. She admitted it?" Poirot shook his head. "This letter is a performance, a distraction. Notice how it ends abruptly, with a flourish not completed, and the ink, again the same shade as on the torn note." Sharp examined it. "She used the same bottle." "Just so. But what matters, Inspector, is that she left this here knowing we would find it." "Why, to confess." Poirot's eyes hardened. "To misdirect." He glanced toward the wardrobe. Without warning, he crossed the room in 3 quick steps and threw open the right door. Empty. But the left door hung slightly ajar. Poirot swung it open. Empty again. Clara let out a trembling breath. "She's gone!" Poirot raised a hand. "Not gone. Not yet." He reached into the wardrobe, tapping the back panel. A hollow thud. Sharp blinked. "A false back," Poirot pressed. The panel shifted, then swung inward with a soft creak. A narrow passage lay beyond, dusty, dim, and smelling faintly of old stone. Clara clapped a hand over her mouth. "What on earth?" Poirot took a lamp from the bedside table, lit it, and stepped into the hidden passage. "Follow closely," he said. The staircase was steep, spiralling downward into a cellar older than the manor above. The walls were rough-hewn stone, slick with moisture. At the bottom, a faint glow flickered. Sharp drew his revolver. "Careful," Poirot said quietly. "Beatrice is frightened. A cornered animal is dangerous." They turned into a low-ceilinged storage room. Barrels lined the walls. Dust coated everything. And in the corner, huddled beside a stack of crates, sat Beatrice Hale. Her apron was stained with ink. Her fingers, trembling, were streaked blue to the knuckles. Clara gasped. "Beatrice!" Beatrice looked up. Her eyes were haunted, rimmed with red. "Miss Clara, I'm sorry. I never meant—" Sharp raised his revolver. "Hands where I can see them." Poirot stepped between them. "Beatrice, mademoiselle, no one will harm you, but you must tell us what you have done." Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut, shaking uncontrollably. "I didn't kill her. I swear it. But I knew what would happen. I knew she would be frightened. I knew she would collapse." Poirot crouched beside her. "Tell us everything." Beatrice's voice cracked. She was going to change her will. She said it only days before she died. She was leaving more to Miss Clara and cutting off Mr. Greaves completely." Clara's eyes widened. Poirot nodded. "Go on." "I overheard Mr. Greaves pressuring her, threatening to expose something terrible, something about Mr. Hamilton. I didn't know what it was, but she became frantic. And then Edmund Sykes, he kept sending letters, demanding money. She was terrified of him." Beatrice buried her face in her hands. "I saw what it was doing to her. She grew pale, nervous. I wanted to help to make the threats stop." Poirot's voice softened. "So you intervened?" Beatrice nodded weakly. "I wrote a fake note to Miss Clara, using her ladyship's handwriting as best I could. I meant to warn Miss Clara to speak to your aunt, to help her. But Lady Ashbury found me writing it. She confronted me." "What happened?" Clara whispered. Beatrice's shoulders shook. "She tore the note from my hand. She was angry, no, terrified. She thought I was another blackmailer. I tried to explain, but she ran to the study, clutching her chest. I followed, but she collapsed before she reached the desk." Sharp lowered his weapon. "So it was you who staged the note?" Beatrice nodded miserably. "I was afraid. I panicked. I placed the torn sheet on the desk so it would look, I don't know, like she meant for someone to find it." Poirot inhaled deeply. "But the ink on your hands, the fingerprints on the ledger?" Beatrice swallowed. "I used the ink bottle in her room to finish the fake note. I didn't realize it stained so badly." Clara stepped forward, voice trembling. "Beatrice, you didn't kill her. You made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but you didn't kill her." Beatrice looked up through tears. "Does that matter now?" Poirot stood. "It matters greatly, because the true cause of Lady Ashbury's collapse was not fear." Sharp blinked. "Not?" Poirot's expression darkened. "No, Madame Ashbury did not die from fright." He looked at each of them slowly, gravely. "She was poisoned." Chapter 10. The Final Arrangement of the Pieces. A thick, suffocating hush fell over the cellar. Even the wind outside seemed to pause as Poirot's words settled into the air like drifting ash. "Poisoned," Clara whispered, her face draining of colour. "But how? By whom?" Poirot paced slowly across the stone floor, his hands clasped behind him, his voice soft but precise. "Let us consider, mes amis. Lady Ashbury collapses suddenly. A woman of frail nerves, yes, but also of strong constitution for her age. She had no history of heart failure, no moments of faintness before the last week. And then, the most curious detail, the faint scent of bitter almonds at the scene." Sharp stiffened. "Cyanide. Precisely. Yet there was no sign of tampered food, no poisoned tea, no suspicious glass." Poirot lifted a finger. "Not unless the poison arrived by a more subtle route." Beatrice stared at him with wide, horrified eyes. I never touched her food. I swear it." "I do not believe you did," Poirot said gently. "But someone else did. Not to kill her directly, but to weaken her day by day. A microdose. A whisper of poison. Enough to mimic exhaustion, dizziness, anxiety. Enough to make her vulnerable." He paused. "And then the final dose. Delivered the night before her death." Clara clutched her shawl tighter. "But who? Why go to such lengths?" Poirot stepped into the centre of the cellar, the dim lamplight casting long shadows around him. "Let us review the motives. Edmund Sykes, a blackmailer. Yet greedy men prefer their sources of income alive. Lionel Greaves, desperate, fearful of exposure, but his threats pushed her, not killed her. And Beatrice, misguided, panicked but motivated by protection, not harm." He turned. "That leaves only one person who benefits from Lady Ashbury's death. One who stood quietly in the background, unnoticed, unchallenged, always near enough to observe every secret unfolding." Sharp frowned. "But who? We've questioned everyone." Poirot smiled faintly, though his eyes remained cold. "Ah, no, Inspector. We questioned those who were visible, those who made noise, but the truly dangerous culprit is the one who creates no disturbance at all." He looked at Clara. "Mademoiselle, your Aunt Margaret had a lawyer she trusted deeply, did she not?" Clara blinked, startled. "Mr. Edwin Mallory, but he's been with our family for decades. He handled all her affairs." Poirot nodded. "Just so. Too smoothly, I think, too invisibly." Sharp stiffened. "Poirot, you can't honestly be suggesting—" "I am not suggesting, Inspector," Poirot said softly. "I am stating." He withdrew a folded paper from his inner pocket. "The revised will?" Clara gasped. "But that Aunt Margaret's safe was locked." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "And it had not been opened, not by Lady Ashbury." He held up another object. A tiny sliver of metal, bent at the tip. A lockpick, concealed beneath the lining of Mr. Mallory's briefcase. Sharp's jaw tightened. "You searched his case?" "A detective must sometimes indulge curiosity," Poirot said with a shrug. "And what I found was most interesting." He read aloud from the will, "I leave the majority of my estate to my nephew by marriage, Mr. Edwin Mallory." Clara staggered back, as if struck. No. Aunt Margaret despised the thought of leaving anything to him. She said it often. Poirot nodded. "Precisely. And yet this will, dated 2 months ago, declares a sudden profound change of heart. Curious, n'est-ce pas? Sharp looked thunderstruck. Forged. A masterful forgery, Poirot said. Mallory is a lawyer. He knows her handwriting, her phrasing, her signature. And being her attorney, he would naturally be expected to retrieve the will upon her, death without arousing suspicion. Clara's voice trembled. But why poison her slowly? Why not, if he truly wished her dead? Poirot raised a hand. Patience, mademoiselle. Mallory is meticulous. He needed to ensure her decline seemed natural, caused by stress, by fear, by increasing burdens. He planted seeds. He encouraged Sykes's blackmail by hinting at unpaid debts. He emboldened Lionel Greaves by mentioning the hidden Hamilton scandal at precisely the right moment. Sharp swore under his breath. He orchestrated the pressure. And when her health was sufficiently weakened, Poirot continued, he administered the final dose of cyanide, likely through her nightly tonic, a tonic he personally prepared during his last visit, claiming it would ease her nerves. Clara cried out, "He was here that night. I served them tea while they spoke privately." Poirot bowed his head. "Exactly." Beatrice whispered, "But what about the note? The ink?" Poirot smiled gently. "You provided the confusion he needed. Your meddling created a perfect smokescreen. Mallory seized the opportunity to let suspicion scatter among Sykes, Greaves, even yourself." He turned toward Sharp. "And now, Inspector, we must hurry. Mallory will have realized the false will is missing." Sharp holstered his weapon with a grim nod. "We'll arrest him at once." "No," Poirot said firmly, quietly, discreetly. "Men like Mallory do not go willingly." The confrontation took place in the Manor's drawing-room, where Mallory was already gathering papers into his briefcase with tense efficiency. When the door opened, he looked up sharply. "Inspector Sharp! Miss Ashbury? Something the matter?" Poirot stepped in calmly. "Only that the game is over, Monsieur Mallory." Mallory froze. His eyes darted to the briefcase, to the window, to the door. I don't understand." Poirot smiled sadly. "Then allow me to enlighten you." He gave a short, precise account, every detail laid bare like a surgeon exposing a wound. As Poirot spoke, Mallory's face drained of colour until he looked like a figure cut from porcelain. "You have no proof," Mallory finally hissed. Poirot lifted the revised will. "This, monsieur, is proof, and the residue of cyanide found on your fountain pen another." Sharp stepped forward, hand on his cuffs. "Edwin Mallory, you are under arrest for the murder of Lady Margaret Ashbury." Mallory lunged toward the window. Sharp moved faster. The two crashed against the settee, but Sharp, stocky and determined, pinned the lawyer within seconds. Mallory sagged, defeated, breathing heavily. "It was supposed to be perfect," he gasped. "She never appreciated my counsel. I built her empire. I kept her secrets. And she was going to change everything, cut me out entirely." Poirot bowed his head. "Murder, monsieur, is rarely perfect." When Mallory was taken away, Clara sank into an armchair, trembling with relief and sorrow. Poirot stood beside her. "You have been most brave, mademoiselle." She looked up at him through tears. "Thank you for giving her justice." Poirot placed a comforting hand over hers. "It is not a justice I give, but truth, and truth, mademoiselle, is the only salve that heals." Beatrice approached timidly. "Miss Clara, I am so sorry for my foolish actions." Clara took her hand gently. "You tried to protect her in your own way. I forgive you." Poirot smiled softly at the tableau. "And now, mes amis," he said, "the case of the wealthy widow's secret is complete." He turned toward the window, where dawn was beginning to break, casting pale gold across the frosted glass. "The sun rises," he whispered, "and with it, clarity."